Can you speak a bit about how the economy got to that point? My understanding is that previous administrations had taken out an IMF loan, and there has been a lot of kind of restrictions placed on the way that business can be conducted, really, in Argentina, if you don't mind, and from the government's perspective, not actual business, but if you don't mind expanding on that.
Yeah, sure. So the previous administration, of Mauricio Macri, who is part of the Juntos por el Cambio coalition, which is sort of the broad center-right party in Argentina, took out a $57 billion loan from the IMF in, I believe it was 2018. And, theoretically, the idea was that this loan was going to be able to pay off all of Argentina, if not all of Argentina's external debt, to help pay some of that off. Much of that debt was for previous loans from the IMF. And, in practice, what it ended up doing was finance this sort of massive capital flight from the country. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that major corporations and a lot of wealthy citizens were able to sort of buy up dollars, keep them overseas, avoid kind of tax payment. And so what we've seen in the years since is inflation has kept going on up. We have seen poverty rise steadily. And to this day, Argentina kind of remains under the thumb of this international lender. And, I think part of Sergio Massa's, I wouldn't say his appeal, but one of the reasons why he's sort of considered a more of a moderate candidate is that he has sort of pledged to kind of balance Argentina's budgets. That would be kind of a mixture of some austerity measures, although to his credit, he has been quite adamant about his desire to protect public education and public health care. But yeah, I mean, Argentina remains in dire economic straits, and I don't think a figure like Milei could have gained the traction that he did were things not as bad as they are. And whoever wins in November is going to inherit, a country that is in shambles in a lot of ways.
I mean, so Massa, would you describe him as a centrist candidate essentially, and what does that, if you entail, and what are the challenges that presents when you're facing somebody like Milei, who is a wrecker in every sense?
Yeah, I mean, Massa comes from the right wing of the Peronist coalition. It's kind of complicated, but Argentina has many different political parties and then sort of voting blocs that kind of pool together into these different coalitions. Sergio Massa comes from the right of the kind of broad center-left coalition that is known as the Peronists. And his policy proposals are mostly centered around extraction, shale gas, lithium, and kind of balancing out Argentina's, fiscal debt, which will obviously take many years. But he himself is I don't think has made any kind of, I don't want to say that let me back that up a little bit. It's not that he hasn't made certain promises, but I don't think the idea that somehow, like, this is not Lula, this is not even Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner. This is someone who, comes from a more conservative background. And in the kind of lead up to the election, he did make some overtures to workers. He sort of rolled back a sales tax or allowed kind of people who spend within the country to recover some of those funds. He also eliminated an income tax for a number of other workers as sort of a way to kind of appease, working classes and the middle classes ahead of the vote. But austerity, or in some shape or form, is coming one way or another, whether it's sort of this extreme version under Milei or a kind of more moderate, kind of managed plan under Massa.
Well, that's just notable because there have been obviously some resurgent center-left or leftist movements movements in other countries in Latin America. I mean, I mentioned earlier some of the other leaders who have been in opposition to Milei, like Lula and Petro as well. This feels like a situation where Argentina hasn't caught up to some of the insurgent political movements in neighboring nations. Can you speak a bit about the unique nature of why that is the case, and why this kind of centrist is the representative to face off against this very dangerous figure?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to say that the left is in retreat in Argentina right now. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that their kind of party or coalition was in power during the pandemic and in the years afterwards. So they, what we've seen throughout Latin America and really throughout much of the Western world is that, there's a strong desire to throw out governments that have been kind of ruling during these very difficult economic and social times. And Argentina's center-left coalition has been in power through the pandemic, through a world historic drought that hit the country last year, which is itself a product of climate change. But you really have a kind of confluence of a lot of different world crises at once happening in Argentina. So yeah, I mean, I think all of that kind of contributes to a strong anti-Peronist sentiment. And what may yet save Massa is that his opposition is just so bonkers and so out there that I think, Argentina can't stomach, electing this guy. We'll see if that's the case. Already Milei has started making overtures to Juntos para el Cambio, which is the kind of more established center-right party. And, we'll see if just how strong anti-Peronism is in Argentina. I know that sort of anti-petismo, sort of an anti-workers party sentiment in Brazil nearly carried Bolsonaro to victory in 2022. But yeah, that's sort of, I guess, kind of the panorama of why you don't see kind of a leftist figure emerging in Argentina the way that Boric has in Chile and Gustavo Petro has in Colombia and Lula has returned in Brazil. Some of this is also kind of a product of timing.